He's mine. He's chosen me. Pazuzu's Reagan is the only Reagan.
What happens when a Hollywood studio tries to outdo a horror classic and ends up unleashing pure chaos instead? 1977's Exorcist II, The Heretic, was supposed to haunt your nightmares, but what actually hit theaters was so strange it became legendary for all the wrong reasons. We're talking derailed scripts, on-set disasters, locusts gone wild, and A-list actors who looked like they wanted to escape. But here's the wildest part. One decision behind the scenes doomed the whole production before filming even started, and almost nobody talks about it. How did a sequel with this much star power and budget become the ultimate cautionary tale? Stick around, because by the end you'll be stunned this movie ever left the cutting room floor. Number 1, the trailer sold a horror film that didn't exist. Before audiences saw the film, they saw the trailer, and that's where expectations were set up for disaster. The marketing leaned heavily on the legacy of the first Exorcist, teasing dark possession scenes, shocking imagery, and the promise of more demonic terror. It looked like a true continuation of the nightmare. When people finally sat in theaters, what they got was something completely different. Philosophical speeches, psychic machines, and lengthy dreamlike sequences that felt more like science fiction than horror. The disconnect between the trailer and the finished film left audiences angry, and word spread fast. Many felt they'd been tricked into buying tickets for a film that simply wasn't what was promised. Number 2, the original creators refused to be involved. The moment Warner Brothers announced Exorcist II, The Heretic, fans expected the same creative firepower that made the original a masterpiece. Instead, both William Friedkin, the director, and William Peter Blatty, the writer, wanted nothing to do with it. They were proud of the first film and had no interest in revisiting it. Without them, the studio scrambled for a new team, and that decision set the sequel on shaky ground before the cameras even rolled. What audiences got was a project led by people who never shaped the first film in the first place. It's like trying to continue a symphony when the composer's already left the stage. From day one, the sequel lacked the guiding vision that gave the original its power, and that's why many say the disaster was baked in from the very start. Number 3, the director wanted healing, not horror. John Boorman, the man chosen to direct Exorcist II, had a very different vision from what fans expected. He openly said he found the first film harsh and disturbing, especially in how it treated Reagan as a child. For the sequel, he wanted to shift the tone toward healing and hope, focusing on themes of spiritual growth rather than pure terror. The problem was that audiences came in looking for a horror film, not a philosophical drama about overcoming pain. This clash between Boorman's intentions and the expectations of the crowd created a gap that the film could never close. Instead of being remembered as bold or uplifting, his approach was seen as misguided. To this day, it's one of the clearest examples of how a director's vision can completely alienate the very audience it was meant to reach. Number 4, Linda Blair only agreed after a major script overhaul. Linda Blair didn't just jump back into Reagan's shoes for a paycheck. She had serious doubts about the original script, calling it confusing and flat. She told Warner Brothers that if they wanted her name on the poster, they need to make Reagan more than just a haunted teenager repeating the past. After plenty of rewrites and promises that Reagan would actually get to grow up this time, Blair finally agreed and signed on. But even with all her negotiation and star power, not even the original possessed child could save the sequel from cinematic doom. You could say the production needed an exorcism more than Reagan ever did. Blair showed up ready to work, and sometimes even the right casting can't stop a train wreck. Number 5, the script changed every day. If there's one thing a film crew dreads, it's a script that won't stay still. That's exactly what happened on Exorcist II. William Goodhart wrote the original draft, but director John Boorman wasn't satisfied, so rewrites started piling up. By the time the cameras were rolling, pages were being reworked on the set almost daily. Actors complained about learning new lines overnight, and even the crew admitted they didn't always know how a scene was supposed to end. With no clear blueprint, the story shifted into a confusing mix of mysticism, science fiction, and half-finished ideas. The constant changes left the film feeling disjointed, and audiences could tell. Instead of building tension like the original, The Heretic stumbled through scenes that felt mismatched, as if no one had a firm grip on what the movie was really about. Number 6, the director caught a rare disease on set. As if the film wasn't cursed enough, the production literally made its director sick. John Boorman came down with San Joaquin Valley fever, a rare fungal infection that affects the lungs. It spread from spores in the dust brought in to build the African-themed sets. The illness was so severe that filming had to stop for weeks while Boorman recovered. In Hollywood, delays like that cost serious money, and in this case, they added even more pressure to an already troubled project. When a director's battling a real disease in the middle of shooting, the Creative focus on the film slips further away. Instead of building momentum, the project stalled, draining energy from the cast and crew. Number 7, there was an actual plague of locusts. One of the film's most bizarre choices was the heavy use of locusts. To capture the climax, the crew imported thousands of them from England, believing real insects would create the most authentic effect. The plan quickly fell apart. Locusts don't follow stage directions, and these ones either escaped into the rafters or dropped dead in piles, sometimes by the hundreds each day. Keeping them alive long enough to shoot was a losing battle, and the chaos slowed down filming. Instead of a powerful symbol of demonic power, the production was left with a swarm of unpredictable insects that drained time and money. What was meant to be terrifying on screen turned into one of the most infamous behind-the-scenes headaches in horror history. Number 8, the synchronizer was a laughingstock. In the film, it's a glowing headset that supposedly links two minds together, letting one person experience the thoughts and memories of another. The machine was meant to look futuristic and unsettling, but audiences couldn't take it seriously. Instead of fear, it sparked laughter. Critics compared it to a leftover prop from a cheap sci-fi serial. Even the cast struggled to play the scene straight, knowing how odd the device looked. Rather than building suspense, the synchronizer became a symbol of how far the sequel had drifted from the tone of the original. Number 9, James Earl Jones was forced to wear a locust costume. Fans who spotted James Earl Jones in the cast expected a strong performance, especially since his voice had already become legendary through Star Wars. What they didn't expect to see was him dressed as a giant locust. In one of the film's most surreal scenes, Jones appears in an elaborate bug-like attire, complete with a headpiece and wings as part of a vision sequence. While it was supposed to carry symbolic meaning, the effect was more confusing than terrifying. For many viewers, the sight of such a respected actor in such a costume summed up the film's misplaced ambition. Instead of elevating the story, left audiences wondering why one of the greatest voices in cinema history was reduced to playing dress-up in a locust suit. Number 10, Kitty Wynn walked away from Hollywood. Kitty Wynn, who returned to play Sharon Spencer after appearing in the first Exorcist, didn't stay in Hollywood much longer after this sequel. While she'd shown real promise earlier in her career, The Heretic ended up being her last feature film. She shifted her focus towards stage work and eventually stepped away from acting altogether. Many point to this troubled production as the breaking point that convinced her to leave the industry. For fans of the original, her sudden disappearance from film felt like a loss, since she'd brought such grounded realism to her role. Number 11, composer Ennio was baffled. One of the strangest choices in Exorcist II came from its music. The studio brought in Ennio Morricone, a legendary composer known for classics like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. What he delivered was unlike anything audiences expected from a horror sequel. The soundtrack jumped from haunting chants to sudden bursts of rock rhythms, then shifted into operatic tones. On its own, the music was bold and experimental, but paired with the film, it felt mismatched and confusing. Critics noted how the score clashed with the tone of the scenes it was supposed to support. Instead of building tension, it only added to the sense that the film had lost direction. Number 12, the premiere was a legendary catastrophe. When Exorcist II: The Heretic premiered in 1977, the studio expected another cultural moment like the original. What they got was disappointment. Reporters say the audience erupted in laughter during the scenes meant to be serious. Some booed, others shouted at the screen, and many walked out before the credits rolled. The atmosphere turned so sour that Warner Brothers executives had to leave the theater in a hurry to escape angry reactions. Word of mouth spread instantly, and what should have been a grand debut became one of the most notorious premieres in film history. Instead of shocking viewers with horror, the sequel became a punchline on its very first night. That disastrous showing set the tone for how critics and fans will remember the film for decades to come. Number 13, the studio ignored test screening warnings. Studios often hold test screenings to gauge how audiences react before a wide release. For Exorcist II: The Heretic, those early reactions were not good. People found the story confusing, the pacing uneven, and the new ideas far removed from the horror they were expecting. Instead of using that feedback to make serious changes, Warner Brothers pressed ahead with release plans, hoping the Exorcist name alone would bring in audiences. That choice backfired in a big way. When the film officially hit theaters, the backlash was immediate and brutal, echoing everything the test audiences had already warned about. By ignoring those early red flags, the studio turned what could have been a quiet disappointment into a public disaster, leaving the sequel cemented as one of the most notorious missteps in horror history. Number 14, Richard Burton sleepwalked through his role. When Warner Brothers cast Richard Burton as Father Lamont, they had secured one of the biggest names in acting. Burton was known for his powerful performances, yet in The Heretic, he looked strangely detached. Reports from the time suggested he accepted the part mainly for the paycheck, and critics quickly noticed how flat his performance felt. Instead of commanding the screen, Burton often appeared distracted, his delivery uneven and distant. It didn't help that the script was changing constantly, making it harder for him to anchor the role. For audiences who expected the same intensity that made him famous, his performance became one of the film's weakest points. Rather than elevating the movie, Burton's presence reminded viewers how much potential was being wasted in a project already falling apart. Number 15, Louise Fletcher's talent was wasted. Fresh off her Oscar-winning role as Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Louise Fletcher joined Exorcist II with high expectations surrounding her performance. She played Dr. Jean Tuskin, the psychiatrist trying to unlock Reagan's suppressed memories using the film's strange synchronizer machine. On paper, the role could have added depth and credibility to the story. In practice, the confusing script left her with little to do beyond scientific explanations and scenes that never paid off. Fletcher's talent was clear, but the movie gave her no meaningful material to elevate. Critics pointed out how one of the most acclaimed actresses of the decade ended up trapped in a role that did little justice to her skills. It remains one of the most glaring examples of wasted casting in the film. Number 16, the demon Pazuzu reimagined. In the original Exorcist, Pazuzu was an unmistakable force of evil, the ancient demon tormenting Reagan and testing the faith of everyone around her. By the time The Heretic came out, the same demon had been reshaped into something far more confusing. The sequel leaned into mythical interpretations, treating Pazuzu almost like a symbolic presence tied to a human consciousness and even healing. Instead of a terrifying monster that audiences feared, the film presented a version of Pazuzu that was abstract and strangely philosophical. Viewers who came looking for pure horror were left scratching their heads, wondering why the villain that once defined dread was suddenly softened into a broader metaphor. That shift stripped away one of the most powerful elements that made the original so unforgettable. Number 17, the authentic Africa was fake. Much of Exorcist II was set in Africa, tied to Father Merrin's past exorcisms and visions. John Boorman had wanted to shoot on location, but securing real African sites proved difficult. Instead, most of the authentic African settings were built on Warner Brothers backlots or recreated with studio sets. Painted backdrops, artificial dust, and staged huts tried to pass as Ethiopia, but audiences could easily tell the difference. The lack of realism weakened scenes that were supposed to feel epic and spiritual. Instead of transporting viewers, the settings exposed the film's limitations. With the first Exorcist famously grounded in a gritty real-world style, these studio-made landscapes stood out as artificial. The attempt to recapture Africa without leaving Hollywood became another example of how production shortcuts worked against the film's credibility. Number 18, they wasted the budget. When Warner Brothers greenlit Exorcist II: The Heretic, they gave it a budget of around $14 million, larger than what the original film cost to make. With more money, the studio expected a polished, powerful sequel that would expand the franchise. Instead, the funds disappeared into endless rewrites, elaborate sets, and production delays. The imported locusts alone drained resources, as did rebuilding entire locations on sound stages. Director John Boorman's illness added to the expense, forcing filming to pause and schedules to stretch. By the end, the movie looked expensive, but it didn't carry the weight of its price tag. Critics and audiences alike felt that the film had squandered its budget, proving that more money doesn't guarantee a stronger story. In fact, the overspending only highlighted how far this sequel had lost its way. Number 19, the house was rebuilt from scratch. For Exorcist II, the filmmakers didn't just return to Georgetown and reuse the famous McNeil house from the first film. Instead, they spent a fortune recreating it on a soundstage. Walls, rooms, and even the stairway had become iconic in the original were reconstructed down to the smallest detail. It was an expensive move, especially given how much of the sequel didn't actually focus on that location. The rebuild cost time and resources that could have gone elsewhere in the production. In the end, the set served more as a reminder of the original's legacy than as a meaningful part of the story. Audiences left theaters remembering how effective the house was in the first film, which only highlighted how out of place it felt in the sequel. Number 20, they tried to hypnotize Linda Blair. Linda Blair returned as Reagan McNeil, but her involvement came with strange stories. One of the most persistent rumors claimed that the filmmakers tried real hypnosis on her to help with certain scenes. The idea tied into the film's obsession with mind control and the psychic synchronizer machine. However, there's no reliable evidence that Blair was ever hypnotized during production. She's spoken about the constant rewrites and confusion on set, but not about being placed under hypnosis. The rumor most likely grew out of the film's unusual subject matter and the blurred line between the script's fantasy devices and real-life filming. Still, the fact that people believed it shows how much chaos surrounded the movie. Even decades later, whispers of hypnosis add to the legend of a troubled shoot. Number 21, its working title was Legion. Over the years, fans have repeated a claim that Exorcist II once carried the working title The Legion. That has caused confusion since Legion was actually the title of William Peter Blatty's novel, which later became the basis for The Exorcist III. In reality, The Heretic was the chosen subtitle early in development, and there's no verified record of the production ever being officially tied to the Legion. The mix-up likely came from fans trying to link the messy sequel to the better-regarded third film. While the rumor makes for an interesting bit of trivia, it's more myth than fact. What it really shows is how badly people wanted to disassociate this sequel from the original story and pin the Legion name to something of higher quality. Number 22, the franchise nearly died. The fallout from Exorcist II: The Heretic was so severe that it stalled the franchise for more than a decade. After the original film became a cultural phenomenon, Warner Brothers had plans for the series to continue strong. Instead, the sequel's failure left the brand toxic. Critics called it confusing, audiences mocked it, and the reputation of the Exorcist name sank. For years, studios avoided touching the property, unsure if it could recover. It wasn't until 1990 that The Exorcist III finally arrived, built on William Peter Blatty's own novel, Legion. By then, the damage had been done. Many fans had already written off the series. Number 23, the original director's ultimate insult. William Friedkin, the director of the original Exorcist, didn't hold back when asked about the sequel. After seeing The Heretic, he called it a stupid mess and went further by labeling it the worst piece of filmmaking I've ever seen. His blunt words carried weight, especially since he'd been responsible for turning the first film into a landmark of horror. Friedkin's reaction wasn't just personal, it reflected how far the sequel had strayed from what made the original so powerful. Coming from the man who helped define the franchise, the insult cemented the sequel's place as a failure in the eyes of critics and fans alike. To this day, his harsh review stands out as one of the most memorable condemnations ever given by a filmmaker about a follow-up to his own work. Number 24, Boorman's children appeared in the movie. Director John Boorman made Exorcist II something of a family affair by casting his own children in small roles. They appear briefly in scenes, blending into the background of the story. It was meant as a personal touch, a way of leaving his mark beyond the camera. For most viewers, their appearances passed unnoticed, lost in the chaos of the larger plot. Still, the fact that Boorman placed his kids in the film highlights how personal the project was to him, even as the production spiraled out of control. To critics, it looked like another indulgence in a film already weighed down by too many odd choices. To Boorman, though, it was a way of stamping family into a movie he'd hoped would mean more than it did. Number 25, both Scorsese and Boorman actually liked it. While critics were busy dismantling Exorcist II and audiences lined up to roast it, there were at least two people who proudly claimed to enjoy the final product: director John Boorman himself and none other than Martin Scorsese. Boorman defended the movie's bold choices, saying he'd made exactly the film he wanted. Scorsese, meanwhile, saw something everyone else missed. He compared Exorcist II's surreal visuals to European art cinema and praised its dreamlike, ambitious style. Sure, most people laughed or stormed out of the theater, but somewhere out there, an Oscar-winning director and the guy behind the whole thing were nodding in approval. It didn't save the film's reputation, but it did give the movie a strangely elite fan club. And that's it. Now, for the big question. Was Exorcist II truly an unforgivable mess? Or is it one of those rare disasters that's so bizarre, so out of control, that it actually deserves a second look? Let us know in the comments section what you thought about this wild ride. And if you really want to understand just how far the movie strayed, check out our video covering unknown scary facts from the original Exorcist film. There are shocking secrets in the making of that masterpiece that put this sequel's weirdness in a whole new light. Stay tuned for our next Classic Movie Rewind.